Well, hello everyone. I'm Josh Galecki. I'm hosting this little positioning panel we have tonight. Is that everything come through? Oh, there we are on Twitch. Wonderful, wonderful. I've got to mute that because now I'm hearing myself again. Okay, hearing echoes. All right. So before we get started on the panel, I figured we could go around and introduce ourselves and then do some quick Boston Indies announcements. I'm Josh Galecki.
I'll go. Sure. I'm Matt Brelsford of Giant Light Studios, working on Betty and Earl.
I always read from my website. Hi, I'm Ichiro. I'm founder of Deshoban Games, an independent game studio in the Boston area. I've been in the industry for 3 decades at this point. I advise a bunch of VC-backed startups. Most really interesting recent thing that I've done is I worked over at Valve helping the Steam team sort of figure out how to help devs market their games. Hi,
I'm Alicia Fontaine. I'm a stealth panelist this evening. I'm a marketer by profession, focused on business-to-business marketing, but I also consult for video game studios, including Ichiro's.
You're not very stealthy. I've seen you the whole time. I'm Aaron Cooper. I'm a healthcare analyst, but in my free times and weekends, I work on a strategy game called A Lion's Age, which is based on medieval South Asian history.
And I guess a little more info about me. I'm a hobbyist game developer working on a farm sim called Moondrop that is just now out in the Steam Next Fest. So hopefully the entire world is playing my demo right now.
Wait, you rebranded?
Yeah, I dropped it used to be Moondrop Mountain, but after this lovely positioning workshop that Chip threw together in December, got a lot of good advice from a lot of people and have gone through some changes. But before we give away the whole plot over here, should go around the community and ask if anybody has other announcements.
Matt, you got some announcements you want to throw out?
Sure. Well, I don't know. It's kind of your show, but yeah, I'm going to be on the Pioneer Valley Game Development Meetup on Sunday, March 6th, where I will be giving a preview version of my upcoming GDC talk, which is entitled An Approach to Game Art for Solo Devs, Small Teams, and Non-Artists. So check me out over there, March 6th, Sunday.
Or if you're at GDC at the end of the month.
Yeah, if you're at GDC, you can see the talk for reals. Yeah.
We also got a coffee hour this Friday if anybody's around. But that's what I got. That's what we got.
Do we have anything from the Twitch chat? Any questions?
Oh, a bunch of people are going to be at GDC. Shell's going to be at GDC. Chad's putting his kid to bed.
Well, a few other Boston Indies announcements. We are planning to have lightning talks on March 21st, and we're just now starting to accept submissions. So someone could post the link to the submission form in the Twitch chat, and it's also it'll be posted to our lovely Slack page. We have a Boston Indies Slack. We also have a Twitter you can follow us on, and a meetup page, which was kind of like the headline gathering thing for tonight. All right, so we got those announcements out of the way. Like I said before, there was a wonderful position workshop that Ichiro put together in December of last year, and we had several community members from the Boston area sign up, as well as the two gurus themselves, Ichiro and Alicia, joining and giving us their experiences. So starting it off, I wasn't really aware of what positioning was before we started this workshop. Like I wasn't sure that what it was as a distinct marketing concept. One of the things it is it's not like trying to market to everybody, but trying to figure out who your product is, or kind of narrowing down your target audience so that you can reach them better. You want people who play your game to be excited about it, and you want the people who aren't going to be excited about your game and who are going to hate your game not play it and not leave you bad reviews for that. So it's really kind of honing in on how that goes. But question for you, Ichiro, what inspired you to run the whole workshop, and why did
Yeah.
you pick positioning in particular?
Sure. So I like running workshops because they are time limited, they are focused, and they're fairly inclusive. So the workshops that I run are everything, some of you all know, like at GDC, I ran Ichiro's Relaxing Chats, which was like a pirate conference of 220 folks from all sorts of disciplines and skill levels, and indie AAA and so forth. And they got together and they just sort of like talked about a number of topics. And since we all have a pandemic going on, I've been doing a bunch of marketing and related workshops. I have always felt that indie developers are great at making their games, but we need to think about them and what we're creating in order to message them to properly. I also think that I'm going to be a little inflammatory here. We're like poor marketeers by default, right? We're like, I'm making a games, right? And so therefore putting it together a group, and this one was in December, just like a month-long thing with about 60 developers and me and Alicia, and present company included. And we basically just talked about our games. We talked about positioning for the games. We talked about messaging, and we'll sort of define those terms in a little bit. We talked about Steam store page. And I think, after 200 messages or, however many billions of messages, hopefully everybody came away being able to talk about their games better.
Need one of those McDonald's signs that said 200 billion messages and counting.
Yep. That's my goal.
Yeah, it was a great experience. I know I learned a lot about it. I think for me, the biggest thing I got out of it was that beforehand, I kind of, the game Moondrop kind of inspired as a trash up the roguelike and the farm sim genres. And that's really interesting ground to explore from a development design perspective. I feel like what I ended up with was kind of a pile of features. I was just adding things on without any guiding light or destination over there. And the positioning shop really helped me figure out who do I see playing my game? How do I see them play? And then that helped me focus on which features do I want to continue developing, which ones are kind of getting in the way. So this was probably a surprising thing to me that I think this marketing workshop really helped the design of my game. It really helped it cohere together a little more.
Matt and I had actually talked, I think it might have been one of the coffee hours where I think it might have been Slime Rancher that we were talking about in terms of sort of as an example of like, so there's like infinite people out there, but you can only really talk to one audience. You can't have multiple voices in how you talk about your game. And I think that positioning workshop definitely helps to figure out what that voice is, which I think is something that closely aligns with the concept of positioning in general.
No, that's a good point. What is Slime Rancher? I've heard the game before.
See, that's sort of the perfect example of how to think about. I mean, this is outside the purview of marketing, but Slime Rancher is a highly successful game on Steam. I think they did it on itch as well, but they sold something like, to use hyperbole, 1 billion copies, and there's still billions and billions of gamers who have never heard of Slime Rancher, which is you have a gun and you Kirby slimes and you make a farm with your slimes. But it's a very weird concept, but it's something that has done bananas numbers and has been very successful. But the fact that you can have millions and millions of people who have played it, and then also like still 95% of the market has never even heard of it, is an element that's encouraging, because your market's out there, but you have to be able to position yourself and word your copy and the voice of how you market the game in the correct way to get the people who would actually be interested.
Yeah, it sounds like they really found their audience there, people who got excited about the game and started to kind of like evangelize the game, spread the word, and that's, word of mouth is the best marketing you can get.
You're landing on something that I think is why positioning is so important, right? And I've defined positioning in its simplest terms as who is your game for and what does it do?
Right.
And when we talk about what does it do, that's really trying to get at the key motivations that the gamer is looking to satisfy by playing the game. Why positioning is so important is it becomes a foundation for all of your marketing efforts, right? So that informs what channels you go through to reach your audience, how you talk to them. Aaron, you mentioned voice. That's where that comes through.
Right.
That's why you want to do positioning first. And marketing ideally is something that you're thinking about while you're making the game. That's why big companies have like market research divisions and they understand customers and they do all sorts of testing. As an indie, you're not going to be able to do that. But what you can figure out is who is really going to love this game? Who is it for? And how do I connect with them? That's what you're going to call your ideal gamer, your ideal customer. And then all your marketing effort from that is trying to identify, find those people. And that means, and I saw in the chat, I think John Bellini mentioned trailers and movie trailers, which is great. I think games are tough because it's a form of entertainment, right? It's not like solving a specific problem necessarily, although it hits key motivations. You want people to be immediately able to qualify themselves when they read about your game and say, is it for me or not? If it's not, fine, I move on. And that's okay. You're not trying to hit the biggest number of users. You're trying to find the ones who are going to love that game so much that they evangelize it to all their friends.
There's a concept of a marketing funnel, and it's marketing 101, which is great because that's the only level I have in marketing. But you kind of have the people, the latest where people heard about your for, and then below that they express interest, and below that they take action. And positioning is making sure you find it's not trying to reach the broadest level of people, but making sure that the people you reach, they fly through that funnel. You find the right people, and with good positioning, you know what you're looking for.
So I want to raise one point. I think that's a good point. But then, per what John's saying in the chat right now, marketing isn't just about messaging your thing to people. Marketing helps you intelligently shape the experience you're creating, from the genre of the game to subgenre to, is it first person? Is it third person? Is it going to be really edgy? Is it going to be really family friendly? And I don't mean this in a cynical way. It's not like, our stats say that we, but, when John says, oh, it's hard to go into marketing mode before it's done. The best thing that you can do for your game is to figure out, as Alicia says, who's going to go into that funnel and stay in that funnel, who's this game for, and how to make it for those people better than any other game and in a way that no other game serves. So, to go back to my initial point, you got to think about the marketing from the first time you do a prototype. And don't think about marketing as like talking about your game. Think about marketing as designing the right game for the market you're trying to hit.
And Josh, I think you alluded to that earlier when you mentioned, as a result of participating in this workshop, moving from having a set of features to a more cohesive experience. That's ideally what marketing should help you do, is figuring out what you're building and why.
Yeah, it was very much leaning towards the rogue-like thing. And I remember one piece of advice Ichiro gave me specifically was to find the story in there. And at first I was thinking like, oh, roguelikes, you don't have any story. You're finding an amulet over there, but there's still like a story of what you're going for. And that's how you kind of lined things up there. Another thing I was thinking of is like before, a good way to design a game when you're still in the prototyping stage is you imagine the most awesome trailer for it that you can come up with. And you try to figure out what looks really nice, because a trailer is a kind of condensed story that you're telling about your game. If you're trying to come up with an awesome trailer, an awesome story, that can kind of be a guiding light. Even if those features don't eventually end up in there, it gives you a direction to go to. We did a number of exercises during the workshop. One of the really interesting ones, I think, was the reading 100 different game descriptions.
Oh, let me see if I can find those. Go ahead. You can talk about it. I'll try to find them and paste them into the chat.
There is Ichiro or Alicia went through and just took the text for 100 different games. It took the short game description on Steam. So we all read through that and we started to see what patterns emerged, which ones we liked, which ones we didn't. Launched a lot of good discussion about what works and what didn't. But what's some of the things you guys picked from that exercise?
I think one of the things that I liked, and this works for trailers too, is an appreciation for the kind of fatigue that you get into when you've read 100 descriptions or you've looked at 100 trailers, and how quickly, maybe in the first handful, you kind of watch the whole trailer, you read the whole description, you click around, but from 6 to 100, if it doesn't grab you, in 3 words or in the first 5 seconds, maybe even less than 5 seconds, you'll just skip off to the next one. Your brain checks out. When I participated in Boston Fig, I went through all of the booths the night before to see which games I liked. And by maybe the 5th one, if it didn't immediately show gameplay, I was gone. And so that kind of fatigue and people who are looking for your games, and I realize this in myself, when I'm looking through Steam for games that are being recommended, if it doesn't grab me in the first 5 seconds, I'm gone. And just how important that is. And, the obvious stuff, don't put your logo up first. Don't talk about something that is, just get to the meat of it as soon as humanly possible. Yeah.
And here, so y'all at home can play along. The purpose of this is, and this is something actionable for you when you're creating your game on Steam, you're talking about it to a publisher or press or to another dev or to anybody. These are, I think it was 200. I always like it. Alicia tells me to use an odd number, but I went with 200. And so you don't have to do it now. Read through these, and eventually you'll get numb. And then you'll just sort of hate all games. And then you'll get past a point where you become sort of like spiritually transcendent. And then you'll sort of see what to do and what not to do when you talk about your games. And this, the exercise here was to sort of like toughen us up and to get our descriptions better.
TLDR, this is why marketers like me will tell you, do not use the word unique.
Don't use the word unique.
That is on my dirty word list for positioning.
Yeah.
Let you show unique.
Show, don't
you don't
tell.
say it.
Yeah. Same with like beautiful, jaw-dropping, innovative. Show, don't tell. Just like
any kind of qualitative adjective where you're indicating the quality level of the game, that's something you don't say yourself.
Right.
Ideally, you get someone else to say it about you.
Do a grammar check for whatever language it's actually being written in. I'm doing a reminder pass through on some of these. Like, if someone has to reread your first sentence, you can forget about the remainder of your description because they've already lost momentum in checking it because your first sentence doesn't have grammatical structure to it.
In the business world, we call that friction in the sales process. So anything that makes it more difficult for someone to learn about your product is a big no. You want to make it as easy for them as possible.
That will continue.
I think Josh is muted.
Yep, Josh is.
I think the valuable things about this exercise too, it took me out of the mindset of a video game developer into the shoes of a video game consumer. After I read like 30 or something of these descriptions, like Ichiro said, I was starting to skip over, my eyes were glazing over, and then I go back and read what I had before, and like if I had written like, oh, here's some extensive world building story or something like that, then I would read that and be like, instantly, I would pass my here. So it gets you, you see out there and you through, and it gets you in the shoes of a consumer, as opposed to, you know why your game is awesome, and it helps you communicate that better.
Yeah, and sort of along that, there are, as someone who really likes roguelikes, I'm really tuned into particular keywords or features that I do or don't like in particular roguelikes, right? So I'm kind of like a level deeper in my hunt for a roguelike, where a lot of the sort of flowery words fall apart, and I'm looking for words like meta progression or run based, or just these kind of keywords that focus me in, and sort of surfacing those in your writing or in your descriptions, I think kind of help reduce that friction to identifying, hey, is this game for me, right? So just trying to figure out what those keywords are for your genre or for your audience, I think has really helped me, right? Am I making a puzzle game that is really hard and really, requires a lot of thought, or am I making sort of a more relaxed experience, right? Like a puzzle player, there may be multiple types of puzzle players. And so surfacing those kind of keywords, I think, has been important for me.
Thinking about this as almost a two-step process. So you have like, I would recommend keeping these 200 descriptions, copying them if you don't already have, permanent access to it. And I actually told Matt about this a couple weeks ago. So there's an album by Captain Beefheart. It's a terrible, terrible album that was recorded in the 70s or the 60s, I forgot. But like, a lot of people will listen to it creatively because it'll set them in a very neutral space because of how atonal and bad it is. So if you read through sort of these 200 descriptions and be like, oh, what am I looking at? And then step 2, look at the games you want to emulate or are competition in the similar market to you, and see what words are actually sticking out in there. Is you got to see the good part after you look at that, put yourself in a neutral space, I think.
Well, I've got a question for Alicia, specifically, since you're a game developer yourself, but you're coming from a professional B2B marketing world, and this can be everybody too. But what are some of the common mistakes you see when developers are trying to position their games?
I mean, I think one of them would be not understanding what category or genre the game is in. And that's one where, part of marketing is, if you're a developer, you need to understand the market. So that could mean, and I get that games are art, so you want to make what you want to make, but you need to understand where that fits in the broader market. People who like this game also like other kinds of games. And maybe it's even for yourself figuring out, my game is X plus Y, where you've mashed mechanics from different games together. And you would never say that to, someone who's going to buy it, but you need to understand at that level, because then you're studying those 2 or 3 games that you're combining in a way and figuring out how did they describe their particular mechanics, or, who did they identify as their target gamer. So, and you incorporate that into your messaging. So first of all would be understanding what category you're in, because that's really important. Games is huge media. Like there's so many different types of games. So that would be number 1. Number 2 would be not reading Ichiro's list of 200 game descriptions. And I don't mean that specific exercise, but I mean getting into the shoes of your potential buyer, because that is what that exercise is meant to evoke, getting you to have that sort of customer empathy and realize which words are just meaningless. I dumped on the word unique. That's why everyone is freaking saying that their game is unique. It just doesn't mean anything anymore. And you've wasted words. Think of, if you kind of think about, if you were like an old school newspaper journalist, you've only got so much real estate on the page. You want to make every single one of those words count. And sometimes that means you're just, shorter, punchier, simpler. So I think that was two things I mentioned so far. I think those are probably the two key things. Oh, and three, it's a visual medium. Like the words only get you so far. So this is very much a case of show, don't tell. There are some things that just aren't going to come across in a description. So you need to figure out what those are, and you need to have an asset to go with that.
I want to expand on her point number one, is to figure out how to the category of your game, because we all do it wrong, because we think our game that we're working on is one thing when in fact it's another. And I'll give you an example. We launched a game last year, August, called T-30, and it is a it's a 30-minute city builder where you build a city, assemble a space fleet, and flee the Earth, all in 30 minutes. And when we were creating this game, we thought, well, this is a city builder, right? Hands up if that makes sense. That totally makes sense. What we realized was that city builder fans don't want a 30-minute experience. They want a 30-hour experience. They want to spend dozens, hundreds, thousands of hours building up a complicated city and watching it interact and really understanding the rules that govern that system. And so we retooled, and we don't really call it a city builder. We just say, build a city, assemble a space fleet, flee the Earth. And I think that communicated to those city builder fans who maybe did want that kind of experience, but also people who maybe wanted to like city builders, but didn't want something quite as involved.
I would tack on one thing I should have said. That should have been number two. How is your game different? It's a crowded market, right? So when you're figuring out what it is, who it's for, be thinking about how is it different from other games in that category.
I think
I'll expand on
marketing-
Go ahead. I'll expand on point number 3, and if you want to make your game look better, Matt has a talk in a couple of weeks about art for non-artists or solo devs. Go for it, Josh. My apologies.
Oh, no worries. Internet talks, that's how it goes. So one of the things I was thinking of, Chris Z does a great how to Steam page, kind of seminar course website sort of thing. A great resource. I'll throw a link to that in the Twitch chat when I'm done and log on to Twitch or the Slack later on. But one of the things he does is he has gone through and videoed users as they go and buy a Steam game. So like actually doing, here's what consumers actually do when they see your Steam page. If they're intrigued by the capsule art, they'll click your game and they'll read the short description, look at the tags, look at the screenshot, and maybe look at the trailer too. But when they play the trailer, they don't play the trailer all the way through. They look at 3 seconds, they skip forward 10 seconds, they look at 3 seconds again. And they're looking for things like, what genre is this? Is this something I'm interested in? Like myself, I'm not interested in horror games. And when I was doing the read 200 description exercises, sometimes I'd be interested in a kind of like a theme or an idea that the game would have and be trying to describe like time traveling monkeys. But then the genre would turn out to be horror. And I'm like, well, that game's not for me. And having that genre in that short description is very key. I'd actually really have a genre description, because even if you tell me there's time traveling monkeys, if I don't know if it's a top-down shooter or a Pokemon RPG, I can't really picture how the game plays. And I'm too lazy to go click the play trailer button. So I'll just go browse for another game at that point.
Josh, are you from the Pacific Northwest?
Nope. Born in Ohio.
Okay, you have that hard T in button, which I had normally seen in the Northwest. Yeah, like circling back to both what you were just talking about and what Ichiro was just talking about in terms of how you're phrasing that positioning. Before we came on here past couple days ago, one example that I think Alicia and a couple other people had touched on when we were going through the exercise for A Lion's Age is I was using the word educational. And that is as much as I will defend the correctness of the game being educational, in terms of positioning, it is inappropriate for bringing in an audience because, just mentioning it to my wife earlier today, she thinks Carmen Sandiego and Math Blaster. And those are not exactly what I'm trying to, position my game with in terms of the minds of gamers. There's probably some nostalgia in there for some people, but genre wise, that is not what I'm in the ballpark of.
Yeah, that can be an important thing. And that's why I think getting feedback is so important, because you see things from one perspective. You read out a short description and you know why you word in that short description, but you're
Right.
so close to your product that you can't see how it's perceived from the consumer. So always get feedback. Run your Steam page past, friends, family, your mother, whoever.
Yeah.
And press, go talk to press. Like if you're going to GDC, talk to people about your game and watch their reaction. If they say, oh, that sounds cool, then they're being nice. If they say, I got to write about this, and they write about it, that's something else. And then you shift your message, you evolve your message based on the reaction.
That's why one business exercise when you're developing a new product is writing what's called a mock press release. What would be the thing that you would say about this game that would hook people's attention? Ichiro built a feature into the original Odd just because it sounded really funny in the press release and got people's attention.
Yeah, and over at Valve, when we were doing new features, we would write a mock press release about that.
Kind of going along with this idea of feedback and getting feedback, one of the things that I try to keep in mind is sometimes negative feedback does not mean you've done something wrong. It just means that that person is not right for your game. And so when I originally was making this puzzle game, right, and I was sharing it with sort of your classic hardcore puzzle game players, a lot of them didn't really take to it. And I realized that and I got really discouraged. But then I kind of realized that actually wasn't my market. And actually I have this other market for a little bit, kind of more laid back audience. And so I think, going back to this Slime Rancher conversation and getting feedback and positioning and stuff, getting feedback is great, but be careful to filter the feedback. And it's not always, oh, they didn't like my game is bad. Sometimes it's they didn't like my game and that game is just not for them, and that's fine. I need to find who this game is for.
It's a data point.
It's just one. And yeah, and I guess, I don't know, I wonder how, I don't know. Yeah, how to position in that way. When you are discouraged, when you thought your primary audience was one thing and you go to them and they don't like it, how do you pivot? What do you do then?
In terms of messaging or product?
Well, let's say messaging, because I'm by the time I did this, and this was a mistake for me, a lesson learned, but I did that pretty late in the process for Betty and Earl. And so I don't want to rebuild the game to make it a more hardcore. It's kind of, that would be not right. So how do I take this product, and I know this is working backwards, and then find my audience for it?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not necessarily working backwards, because you're making the game that you think is going to be the game. It's the game that you want, and you think it's going to resonate with folks. But look, example, Elegy for a Dead World, the game I did with Kind Words alum Zyba Scott and Luigi Guattieri. It's a game about writing fiction, or was a game about writing fiction. And we talked about it it's this game where you're exploring these worlds, and there's all of the worlds where they went through an apocalypse, and you walk up to this and we talk about it, and then we talk about it differently, and we're just it's about British poetry, and we would watch people's faces as they responded. And as Matt says, people, some people like that, some people didn't. Eventually, we were walking the floor of E3 over in LA, and I don't know, this is nearly a decade ago at this point, and we just kept changing the message and telling it to people. And we talked to, if you remember, Joystick, the managing editor of Joystick, Alexander Slowinski, I said, Elegy for a Dead World is and it's been a decade, so I can't remember. It's a game in which you explore worlds based on the works of British Romance era poets, and then you write about them. And then he and his sub-editor Sue said, "We love this," and then they wrote 2 articles about us, right? So we changed the message until we got something that resonated with the right people.
And they had described that, correct? You just said
No,
that?
I mean we described it. That's how we
That was
described
you
it.
we were
And-
workshopping it.
Yeah,
Right,
workshopping. And then lo and behold, our words were what folks used to describe the game. Who, surprise, surprise.
Matt, to your point, I think it is pretty tricky with games. And that's why in the course of the workshop, I referred people to the Quantic Foundry research on gamer motivation. I, as a non-game developer, found that super helpful, because how do you figure out who these people are who are going to enjoy something they've never played before? Try and think about why they play games, because people play games for very different reasons. And
Yeah.
I think that gets at what you're saying about, is this a hardcore puzzle game? Is it something else? Trying to think about what people are going for when they play a game.
I love Quantic Foundry stuff. Very, very helpful in terms of identifying what is the audience for a particular game, and just, like you're saying, their motivations behind that.
I think another, maybe not a question you were asking directly, Matt, but like if you work on something, you spend a good amount of time for that, you show it to one audience, they don't like it. Maybe an implied question there is, how do you tell if my prototype here is a bad idea to invest into, or how do you tell if it's the message around that? Am I asking the wrong people about that? One thing I'd recommend for any game developer to do is that if you use Unity, I can't speak for Unreal, but I'm sure they have similar capabilities. If you use Unity, it's very simple to get a WebGL build up there and throw it onto itch and see if when strangers play the game, are they coming back? Are they playing it once and never returning? What kind of feedback are you getting from them? It's a very simple thing to do. Itch is a very small audience. I wouldn't recommend a company selling things on itch. But in terms of initial validation of a prototype, like, do you find are there people out there who are coming back to your game and putting hours into the game? If so, you have an audience and you've just got to figure out who those are. All right, we got we're about 7:45 right now. Have there been any questions from the Twitch chat? Jeff's monitoring that for me because I'm getting some echo when I have the Twitch window open.
Well, one resource is the Quantric Foundry link, which will help you sort of figure out, well, what are the motivations of various audiences. But I also like, first of all, I I hate creating games that are not for me. I think I'm very bad at it, and it kind of sometimes shows. So, if you're creating a game that you like, congrats, there's part of your audience. But finding comparables for your game, and identify, like, hey, I'm doing a game about extreme skydiving, and it's about making you feel a dopamine drip for the entire thing. And what games do that? So you find comparable games to that. I'm like, oh, Forza Horizon, I feel really Horizons. No, Forza Seasons, right? Somebody help me out. Forza 4 Horizon Ltd. Descenders. All these games make me feel really, really good while playing, and therefore I imagine that my audiences are going to be the same. So if you identify the comps, you got the audiences.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the motivation and how people want to feel. And, even if you're mashing up multiple genres or multiple games, it's Goat Simulator, but it's also a mystery because it involves cadavers from a morgue and you're solving who murdered them while you are making floppy cadavers do weird things. You're welcome. Someone can make that game. I'd probably play it. So figuring out what those motivations are and they overlap and what mechanics are involved will help you figure that out.
The walking goat.
One thing that, speaking of like sort of comps, I can't remember where I heard this, maybe it was Chris Stokowski, but the advice was once you have your comps, go look on SteamDB for when they got jumps in followers. And then look on their Twitter timeline, their Instagram timeline around that time to see what events they were part of, or Google for them around that timeline, see what they did or what they were posting or what event they were part of that got them those bumps. And then you can kind of look like, oh, this is how they got their followers. Maybe that will work for me. And that has been really helpful to like discover new outlets and new venues for marketing pushes and stuff.
I think as creators, it's very tempting to say like, I am an island. I am going to be out there in the desert with my art and I will suffer for it. And yeah, you can be a hermit. That doesn't help your game get to as many people. I think another nice point, I think this was you again on the Slack the other day, talking about looking at comps as like free prototyping. You check out an idea, a movement feel or something like that, and instead of having to do it yourself, you just see what they did. Same thing for marketing. You see what they're doing, you see what they're positioning for, and it's not making your game any less. You're just seeing what ideas work and what don't. You can steal ideas, that's totally fine. Whatever you end up with will be yours.
Yeah, and I would also, one of the things that I found myself doing, I think incorrectly, was like looking 5 years ago. That's too long. Like the market has changed, I think, too much in 5 years. I think even 2 years, I feel like these days is kind of pushing it. There are so many trends that are already exhausted, maybe. And not comparing yourself with, I'm not Jonathan Blow, right? I'm making a puzzle game, but I can't do what he did. And you know what I mean? It's just different. So like being honest with your comps, I think is important.
Yeah, and so to add on to what Matt's saying, I don't think he's saying to, chase trends, although you can if you want. But if you look and you're like, well, Braid was really popular, therefore I'm going to make a game where you can rewind time and it's a platformer, and therefore my comp is going to, and I'm going to sell 1 million units. Well, Braid is over a decade old, so there's a lot of stuff that is now kind of like there's a lot of it's been done. So use those maybe as examples of how to push yourself to do something that adds something new to the existing recipe.
Yeah, and just, if Jonathan Blow was an unknown developer releasing that game right now, would it have sold 1 million copies? I don't think it would have. 10 years ago, there weren't indie games the way there are now, right? So market trends are very different, not just genre trends.
This Braid, you can't release it back then, no matter how hard you try. All right, did we have anything else to chat, Jeff? All right, yeah, we'll be going to the Tutopia next.
That was one question kind of early on. I think it sort of got answered.
Go ahead.
Oh God, this is weird because I'm watching on Twitch and there's a delay, and I'm also in the Zoom call where there's no delay. What's the best way to determine which demographic would most enjoy your game?
I think we covered that one already.
Yeah, man, where were you? Not paying attention to us every single minute.
All right.
Mixing your tiki drinks.
Doing a bar break at the time, maybe.
No, that's fair. There's another question, if you overwhelmingly positive on Steam, whether it has 100 reviews or 1,000, do you do anything to keep your exposure limited at first to a specific target audience, making sure your core audience? I think that's a valid question. I would say don't worry about trying to game that too much. Worry about making a game so phenomenal that people will talk about it and play it, and different enough yet accessible, big, heavy, taller there, that it just needs to be played. And then after that, you can start thinking about like how you shape your audience over time. But like Steam tries its best to kind of democratize at least that for solid games.
I think one of the ways you can address that is as you're thinking about, as you're nearing completion of your game and you've figured out who your ideal gamer is, identify the media and streamers who are a good fit. So if you can, and do outreach so that you're getting a streamer who covers this particular type of game to cover yours, or at least get them to play it, right? And that's where your targeting comes in, because you're not really doing, unless you have money for an ad campaign, you're not really doing targeting in a Steam storefront.
Yeah.
It's everyone is there. Your targeting is basically your genre tag, and maybe that's helpful, maybe it's not.
Yeah, I think a great example of that is when Total Biscuit covered T-30. His audience, maybe it skews older, maybe it skews towards people who want a little bit more of an intricate experience. And he was exactly the right person to play that game, and we saw sales bumps attended to that. I have strong opinions, but I'll let folks talk.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think just to kind of reiterate, I think those are all sort of advertising and is not the full marketing thing, right? Like part of the positioning thing, which I wish I had done. Like I knew that I should be posting on Twitter. Everyone knows they should be posting everywhere and telling people about their game and talking and all this stuff. But the thing that I didn't know early on is that I should be doing this sort of marketing and positioning stuff and figuring out, okay, what is the core of my game? Who is this game for? And then building around that. And so that's the thing I wish I had known starting out, is the positioning is a big part of the marketing. It's not just the advertising on social media.
Yeah, so Word Squared's question is like, presumably once you figure out what Matt is referring to and you're ready to talk about your game, how do you talk about it? Where do you talk about it? Here's my recipe for it, and it changes with every year, with every 5 years, certainly with every 10 years. What we will do with our next game is we are going to come up with a set of end social media outlets. One might be TikTok, one might be Twitter, one might be YouTube Shorts, one might be, I don't know, whatever is upcoming and new. And we'll say, okay, we're going to spend an amount of time hitting each one of these up. And we might hire somebody and do them all at once. We might sort of like grassroots do them one after another. And we set a time limited plan for how we're going to engage them. And then we'll evaluate those after the period. So for example, I'll say, look, we did this last year with TikTok and Twitter, and a little bit of Tumblr, and we're like, we'll give it 6 months on TikTok, doing a video every 3 days, and how are our metrics after that? And we got some engagement. We didn't get enough to keep going. So we said, okay, this isn't where our audience for this particular game is. I think that how long is a piece of string? How long do you do it for? What content do you do? I think it's another talk in and of itself. But if you try to do something and then you do it consistently for 3 months, you do TikTok consistently for 3 months, and you're not getting any traction, then either do it differently on TikTok or move to a different medium, or if you can find a completely new avenue. Like, when I was doing games for the PC for the first time, there's this new thing called Steam, right? That was a perfect medium for what we were talking about, and that blew up. So I would say, I hate to give the answer, but A, it depends. B, if you ever pop onto the Boston Slack and you ask that question, you say, here's my plan, does this make sense? Then there are a bunch of folks who will help you and, sort of kick the tires and walk you through it.
Folks there in the Slack. All right, well, I'd like to thank, oh, there we go.
Yes.
Yeah, you want the news outlets who are going to cover you. So that's going to be the ones who are fit for your audience, and probably game specific versus not game specific, unless you're addressing some sort of social issue or there's something that's connected to like bigger news topic.
I'll be reaching out to non-game people, but unless you're doing something including a population that is not really covered in anything, yeah, games media specifically is probably where you're going to be aiming.
You're thinking about doing the positioning exercise, who gets excited for your game. If there's any sort of press that is associated with that population or community, that can be a great to one of the games I remember looking in the positioning workshop was kind of like the initial tag or pitch was like metal survival hunting game, and he talked about how he went through some heavy metal magazines and he was able to talk with them, show he knew metal very well, and get some coverage based off that. But not everyone's going to be making a heavy metal roguelike, say, or heavy metal first-person shooter. So that might depend on if you do have that kind of unique twist, or if you have something actionable on your positioned community that you're aiming for.
Josh said the dirty word.
Unique.
Unique.
Word? Oh,
Did
unique.
he say unique?
Did you say unique? Just don't
Yeah.
use it in your marketing copy.
But that's a great example, and I think that gets it in one way in which journalists are different from the gamers that you're advertising to. What are they motivated by? Not by playing your game, by writing an article. So how do you give them something that's either really easy or really fun to write about?
Also worth noting, and this is a hard lesson to apply and a bitter pill to swallow, is if nobody is responding to your game the way that you feel that they should be, no press, no streamers, no other developers, then, are you messaging it wrong? Maybe you have this great game that you're talking about in the non-optimal way, and you need to iterate on that. But marketing and game design kind of should be interleaved, and you should take that back and say, well, is there something that really I could bring out of my game to just make it super exciting, interesting, compelling that I'm missing out on?
Yeah, and that's a difficult exercise, is figuring out, is this a product problem or is this a message problem? And that's an area where, the better your network and the bigger it is, and the more you talk to your colleagues, the more you can help suss that out.
I agree, especially in a medium where you're so close to your product. Like my day job, I'm a programmer. If if the product doesn't do well at the day job, well, that's one thing. But you're very personally attached to your game. You put so much of your own free time into it. Yeah, to take a look and be like, this is really worthwhile continuing on. But that's what prototyping is for. You gotta figure that out, even if you're not, you're a year or two into a prototype. Look at what you have and what you can do with it. Sometimes you do have to cut this. All right, I think we'll head over to Topia next. If someone could post the link to that, if that hasn't been posted already in the Twitch chat. And I'd like to thank everybody for attending this panel tonight. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists for joining in and shooting the breeze about paneling or positioning for a while. So thanks a lot. I had a great time. Hope you did.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for hosting.
Milk
See
chocolate
y'all.
is the superior chocolate. See y'all in Topia.